The struggle. Emily Hastings wiped her hands on her apron, her arms aching from hours of carrying trays and refilling coffee cups at the bustling corner diner where she worked. The sound of clinking plates and murmured conversations filled the air, a constant background symphony to her daily grind. She glanced at the clock hanging above the counter, just one more hour until her shift ended, and she could finally pick up her kids from school. Emily's world revolved around her two children, Jake and Ella. At 10 and 7 years old, they were her pride and joy, the reason she pushed through the exhaustion that seemed to follow her like a shadow. She often joked with the regulars at the diner, calling her kids her sunshine duo, but beneath the smiles and banter, Emily carried the heavy weight of financial stress. The cost of lunches. As a single mother, Emily's paycheck barely stretched far enough to cover rent, utilities, and groceries. Extras, like school lunches, often tipped her budget into the red. Recently, the school had introduced stricter policies on unpaid lunch debts, and Emily found herself scrambling to keep up. Most mornings, she prepared lunch for Jake and Ella to take to school, but there were days when she didn't have enough to pack. On those days, she relied on the school cafeteria to feed them, racking up a small but steadily growing tab. She had started borrowing money from friends and even putting small amounts on her credit card to pay off the school lunches, but the cycle felt endless. The guilt weighed on her, especially when she skipped her own meals to stretch the food budget a little further. A painful revelation. One afternoon, Emily arrived at Jake's school early to pick him up. While she waited outside the classroom, she overheard him talking to his best friend, Tyler. "Sometimes my mom doesn't eat dinner," Jake said in a soft voice. "She says she's not hungry, but I know it's because we don't have enough food. She always makes sure me and Ella have something, though." Emily's heart sank as she leaned against the wall, struggling to hold back tears. She had worked so hard to shield her kids from the realities of their situation, but Jake's words made it clear that he understood more than she realized. The thought of him worrying about her well-being broke her heart. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. She couldn't bear the idea of her children going without, but no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. Taking on more. The next day, Emily approached her manager at the diner and asked for additional shifts. "I'll take whatever you've got," she said, her voice determined. Her manager, a kind older woman named Rosa, gave her a concerned look. "Emily, you're already working so hard. Are you sure you can handle more hours?" "I don't have a choice," Emily replied. I need the money. For the kids." Rosa nodded reluctantly. "All right, but promise me you'll take care of yourself too." Emily gave a small, grateful smile, but she knew self-care wasn't an option right now. Her days became a blur of early mornings and late nights, with little time to rest in between. She pushed through her fatigue, fueled by the knowledge that her sacrifices were for Jake and Ella. Holding it together. Despite her exhaustion, Emily tried to keep a brave face for her kids. She still found time to help Jake with his homework and read bedtime stories to Ella, even if her eyes threatened to close as she turned the pages. On weekends, she made pancakes shaped like animals and found creative ways to make their modest apartment feel warm and inviting. But in the quiet moments, when the kids were asleep and the weight of the day settled on her shoulders, Emily allowed herself to feel the full weight of her struggles. She knew she couldn't keep up this pace forever, but she didn't see any other way. The breaking point. One evening, after a particularly grueling double shift, Emily came home to find Jake and Ella waiting up for her. "We made you a card," Ella said, holding up a piece of paper covered in colorful drawings and glitter. Inside, in Jake's careful handwriting, was a simple message: "Thank you for working so hard for us, Mom. We love you." Emily smiled through her tears, hugging them tightly. "You two are my everything," she whispered. "I'll always take care of you." As she tucked them into bed, Emily silently resolved to find a way to give her kids the life they deserved. She didn't know how, but she would figure it out, because that's what mothers do. Little did she know, a chance encounter was about to change everything. An unexpected encounter. Emily rarely had a day off, but when one finally came, she wanted to make it special for Jake and Ella. After weeks of long shifts and hurried dinners, she decided to treat them to something simple but memorable, a visit to their favorite cafe. Jake and Ella loved the cozy spot, a neighborhood gem with cheerful baristas and a menu of rich hot chocolates topped with whipped cream and sprinkles. For them, it was a magical place, and for Emily, it was a rare indulgence she only allowed herself when she could stretch her budget just enough. A treat for the kids. "Can we get the big hot chocolates today, Mom?" Ella asked as they walked toward the cafe, her tiny hand clutching Emily's. "Yeah, with marshmallows?" Jake added, his face lighting up. Emily smiled, though she mentally calculated her remaining cash. "We'll see," she said, ruffling Jake's hair. "But I'm sure we'll get something delicious." Inside the cafe, the familiar hum of the espresso machine and the warm scent of cocoa greeted them. Jake and Ella raced to their favorite corner table by the window, chattering excitedly about what they would order. Emily approached the counter and glanced at the menu. Her fingers hovered over the small amount of cash she had pulled from her wallet earlier. The numbers were tight, but she had just enough for 2 small hot chocolates and a black coffee for herself. She ordered, opting out of a drink for herself to give her kids the extra toppings they wanted. As the barista prepared the drinks, Emily stood quietly at the counter, counting the remaining change in her hand. Every penny mattered, and she wanted to make sure there was enough left over for groceries later. Keanu notices. At a nearby table, Keanu Reeves sat unnoticed, dressed casually in a plain hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap. He had been in town for a few days, taking a break between film projects, and had stumbled upon the cafe during one of his morning walks. The quiet ambience and the anonymity the cafe offered were exactly what he needed. That morning, he had been lost in thought, sipping his coffee and watching the world go by. But his attention was drawn to Emily and her children when he noticed the way her kids beamed with excitement while she carefully placed the drinks on the table. Keanu's eyes followed her as she returned to the counter to grab napkins, her movements unhurried but tired. He saw her glance down at the coins in her hand, counting them with care, and then look back toward her kids with a soft smile. Though she seemed exhausted, her warmth and focus on her children were undeniable. A simple moment. At their table, Jake and Ella eagerly sipped their hot chocolates, whipped cream dotting their noses. "This is the best, Mom," Jake said, holding up his mug like a toast. Emily laughed softly, leaning forward to wipe a bit of whipped cream from Ella's cheek. "I'm glad you like it," she said, her voice warm but quiet. Keanu continued to watch discreetly, his heart tugging at the scene. He could sense that this was a special moment for the family, one made possible by Emily's careful planning and sacrifices. It was a reminder of his own childhood, of the small joys his family had shared even during tough times. Keanu's reflection. Keanu took another sip of his coffee, his thoughts drifting. He had always believed in the power of kindness, especially when it came to helping those who were doing everything they could to take care of others. Emily's dedication to her kids was evident in the way she carried herself, and her kids' happiness was a testament to her love. He thought back to times in his life when strangers had extended unexpected kindness to him, gestures that had stayed with him long after the moment had passed. Watching Emily and her children, Keanu felt a familiar spark, the urge to do something meaningful, even if it was small. An opportunity to help. As Emily gathered napkins for the table, Keanu stood and approached the counter. "Can I settle their bill, too?" he asked the barista quietly, nodding toward Emily and her kids. The barista's eyes widened in recognition, but Keanu placed a finger to his lips, signaling for discretion. "Just tell her someone wanted to brighten her day," he added with a small smile. The barista nodded, processing the payment as Keanu returned to his table. He didn't approach Emily directly. Instead, he watched from a distance, content to let her enjoy the moment with her kids without interruption. A mother's gratitude. When Emily went to the counter to ask for the check, the barista handed her a receipt with a kind smile. "It's already been taken care of," she said. Emily frowned, confused. "What? By who?" The gentleman who was sitting over there, the barista said, nodding toward the table Keanu had just vacated. He said he wanted to brighten your day. Emily turned, but Keanu was gone, having slipped out quietly moments earlier. She clutched the receipt, her throat tightening with emotion. She looked back at Jake and Ella, their faces full of pure, unfiltered joy, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, though the mysterious man who had paid for their drinks was nowhere to be seen. Unbeknownst to Emily, this was just the beginning of Keanu's involvement in her life. A quiet gesture. Emily sat at the corner table with Jake and Ella, her kids happily chatting as they savored their hot chocolates. She found herself smiling, despite her exhaustion. Moments like these, rare as they were, made all the struggles feel worthwhile. Keanu Reeves had remained seated a few tables away, sipping his coffee and observing the small family. His heart warmed as he watched Emily laugh softly at her kids' antics, her tired eyes lighting up every time she looked at them. He could tell she was carrying a heavy burden, but her love and devotion to her children shone through. After a few moments, Keanu stood and casually approached Emily's table. A simple conversation. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his tone warm but understated. "I couldn't help but notice how wonderful your kids are. You're doing a great job as a mom." Emily looked up, startled at first, but then smiled. "Oh, thank you," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They're my everything." Jake and Ella beamed at the compliment, Jake even piping up with, "Our mom's the best." Keanu chuckled. "I can see that," he said. "It's not easy, though, is it?" Emily hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this kind stranger. "It has its challenges," she admitted, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The way they look at you, it's clear you're doing something right." His words struck a chord with Emily, and she found herself relaxing a little. "Thank you," she said again. "That means a lot." Keanu gestured toward the table. "What's the occasion? A special treat?" Emily smiled softly, her hands fiddling with her coffee cup. "I had a rare day off and thought they deserved something nice. They love this place." Keanu glanced at Jake and Ella, who were happily slurping the last of their whipped cream. "Well, you've certainly made their day." Keanu learns more. As they spoke, Keanu subtly guided the conversation toward Emily's situation. She mentioned her job at the diner, her long hours, and how she tried to balance work with raising her kids. She didn't complain, but Keanu could hear the weariness in her voice and see the quiet strength it took for her to hold everything together. He admired her resilience, but he also felt a pang of sadness knowing how many parents like her were struggling to make ends meet. Emily reminded him of his own mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for him and his siblings during tough times. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," Keanu said, "but it's inspiring to see how much you do for your kids." Emily looked down, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I'm just doing what any mom would do." Keanu smiled. "Maybe, but not everyone does it with as much grace as you." A quiet gesture. After a few more minutes of conversation, Keanu excused himself. "It was nice talking with you," he said, nodding toward Jake and Ella. "You've got some amazing kids." "Thank you," Emily said, smiling warmly. "It was nice meeting you." Keanu walked to the counter, where he approached the cafe owner, an older woman who had been watching the interaction with a curious smile. "Can I settle their bill?" Keanu asked quietly, slipping a few large bills onto the counter. "And could you do me a favor?" The owner nodded, her curiosity piqued. "Of course." Keanu handed her a plain envelope, its contents already prepared. "Please give this to the woman at that table after I leave. Just tell her it's from someone who admires her." The owner's eyes widened slightly as she glanced at the envelope, but she nodded again, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. "Consider it done." Keanu gave her a quick, grateful nod before slipping out of the cafe unnoticed. Emily's surprise. A few minutes later, as Emily helped Jake and Ella gather their things, the cafe owner approached their table. "Excuse me," she said, holding out the envelope. "That man you were speaking with asked me to give this to you." Emily frowned, taking the envelope hesitantly. "What? Why?" The owner smiled. "He didn't say much, just that he wanted you to have it. He said you inspire him." Confused but curious, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of cash, enough to cover more than a few school lunches and then some, and a small handwritten note. The note read, "For a mom who inspires, from someone who admires." Emily stared at the note, her hands trembling slightly as tears welled in her eyes. She looked up, scanning the cafe for the man, but he was gone. "Mom, what is it?" Jake asked, tugging at her sleeve. Emily wiped her eyes quickly and smiled at her kids. "It's a gift. From a very kind person." Jake and Ella's faces lit up, though they didn't fully understand the magnitude of what had just happened. As they left the cafe, Emily clutched the envelope tightly, her heart filled with gratitude for the stranger who had turned an ordinary day into something extraordinary. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. The reveal. The next morning, Emily was bustling around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Jake and Ella before school. The events of the previous day still lingered in her mind, the envelope, the note, the generosity of the man at the cafe. She hadn't even had time to fully process it, but she knew she would never forget the kindness of the stranger who had seen her struggle and quietly stepped in to help. "Mom, do you think we'll see him again?" Jake asked as he buttered his toast. "The man from the cafe?" "Maybe," Emily replied, though she wasn't sure. He seemed like someone who just wanted to help without expecting anything in return. "Well, he was really nice," Ella added, her voice full of admiration. "And he kind of looked like the guy from that movie we saw." Emily frowned, confused. "What movie?" "You know, the one with the guy on the motorcycle." Jake chimed in, his excitement building. "He looked like him." Emily froze for a moment. "Wait, are you saying he looked like Keanu Reeves?" "Yeah," both kids exclaimed in unison. A familiar face. After dropping the kids off at school, Emily couldn't shake the thought. Could it really have been Keanu Reeves? She pulled out her phone and searched for recent news articles about him. As she scrolled through images, her breath caught, there he was, wearing the same casual hoodie and baseball cap he had worn at the cafe. "Oh my God," Emily whispered to herself. It was him. Her heart raced as she thought back to their conversation. He had seemed so humble, so unassuming. She couldn't believe she had been sitting across from one of the most famous actors in the world and hadn't even realized it. A letter of gratitude. Later that day, Emily returned to the cafe with a handwritten letter. She approached the owner, the same woman who had handed her the envelope the day before. "Hi," Emily said, holding out the letter. "I just wanted to say thank you for yesterday. And if there's any chance you can get this to the man who helped us, well, I'd really appreciate it." The owner smiled knowingly and took the letter. "I'll make sure he gets it." The letter read, "Dear Mr. Reeves, I only realized who you were after my kids pointed it out, but even if you weren't famous, I would have been just as grateful for your kindness. What you did for me and my children yesterday meant more than I can put into words. It wasn't just the money, it was the reminder that there are still good people in the world who see others and care. Thank you for inspiring me to keep going, and thank you for showing my kids that kindness still matters. With gratitude, Emily Hastings." A visit to the diner. 2 days later, Emily was wiping down tables during a quiet moment at the diner when the bell above the door jingled. She glanced up, ready to greet the new customer, but froze when she saw who it was. Keanu Reeves stood there, his familiar casual attire blending into the diner's modest setting. He offered her a small smile and a wave. "Hi, Emily," he said, stepping closer. "Mr. Reeves," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. What are you doing here?" "I got your letter," Keanu replied, his tone warm. "And I wanted to say, you don't need to thank me. But I also wanted to check in and see how you and your kids are doing." Emily blinked, still trying to process the surreal moment. "They're doing great," she managed to say. "And thank you again, for everything." Keanu gestured toward an empty booth. "Do you have a minute? I'd love to talk." A life-changing conversation. Over a cup of coffee, Emily shared more about her life, her job at the diner, her dreams for Jake and Ella, and the constant challenges of making ends meet. Keanu listened intently, his genuine interest putting her at ease. When she mentioned the ongoing struggle to pay for her kids' school lunches, Keanu leaned forward. "Emily, I'd like to help with that," he said. "I want to make sure Jake and Ella never have to worry about lunches, or anything else they need for school." Emily's eyes widened. "Mr. Reeves, that's too much. I can't accept that." Keanu shook his head. "Please, call me Keanu. And it's not too much. This isn't about charity, it's about making sure two amazing kids have everything they need to thrive. I've been fortunate in my life, and I believe it's my responsibility to give back. Let me do this for them, and for you." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she nodded, unable to find the words to express her gratitude. Keanu continued. "I'll work with the school directly to cover any lunch debts and set up a fund for their future needs. And if there's anything else you or the kids need, don't hesitate to ask." A moment of joy. As Keanu left the diner that day, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She couldn't believe the turn her life had taken, from struggling to provide for her kids to receiving help from one of the most generous and humble people she had ever met. When she picked Jake and Ella up from school that afternoon, she told them about Keanu's visit. Their excitement was contagious, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a sense of hope for the future. A ripple effect. Keanu Reeves wasn't one to let acts of kindness end with a single gesture. After meeting Emily and learning about her struggles, he couldn't stop thinking about the countless other families facing the same challenge, parents juggling bills and necessities while trying to provide something as basic as a school lunch for their children. It was a problem that spoke to him deeply, and he knew he could do more. A fund for change. Within weeks, Keanu worked with his team to establish the Bright Futures Fund, a national initiative aimed at eliminating school lunch debts for families in need. The fund partnered with schools and nonprofits across the country, ensuring children had access to healthy meals without the burden of unpaid balances hanging over their parents. The fund also provided resources for parents, such as budgeting workshops, food assistance programs, and access to community support services. For Keanu, it wasn't just about paying off debts, it was about creating a foundation of support for families like Emily's. When the fund launched, Keanu refused to attach his name to it publicly, preferring to let the initiative speak for itself. But those who worked closely with him knew how much of his heart and energy had gone into the project. Emily gives back. For Emily, the changes in her life were profound. With her children's lunch debts cleared and their future school needs covered by Keanu's generosity, she finally felt like she could breathe again. The relief allowed her to focus on her job without the constant worry of scraping together enough money to make ends meet. But Emily's gratitude didn't stop at her own family. Inspired by Keanu's kindness, she began volunteering at a local food bank, dedicating her weekends to helping other families in her community. Whether it was sorting donations, packing food boxes, or lending an empathetic ear to struggling parents, Emily poured her heart into the work. "Sometimes we just need a little help to get through," she told a young mother one day, handing her a box of groceries. "I've been there. And trust me, things can get better." Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. The food bank's director often praised Emily for her dedication and compassion, and she became a source of hope for many families who walked through the doors. Jake and Ella thrive. Meanwhile, Jake and Ella were thriving at school. With their lunches covered and the financial strain eased at home, the kids could focus on learning and growing without worry. Jake joined the school soccer team, while Ella's newfound confidence led her to audition for the school play. One evening, Jake came home waving a certificate. "Mom, look. I got Student of the Month." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she hugged him. I'm so proud of you, Jake. Ella chimed in, holding up her script. And guess what? I got a speaking role in the play. Emily laughed, pulling both of them into a hug. You two are amazing. Her children's joy reminded her of how far they had come. The kindness of one person had created a ripple effect, transforming not only their circumstances, but also their outlook on life. Keanu's quiet observation. Months later, Keanu found himself back in the neighborhood where he had first met Emily and her kids. Strolling past the cafe, he glanced through the window and smiled. Inside, Emily sat with Jake and Ella, their table filled with hot chocolates and laughter. The scene was a perfect snapshot of a family that had found hope and stability. Keanu didn't go inside. Instead, he continued walking, content knowing that his gesture had made a lasting impact. It wasn't about recognition or gratitude, it was about seeing people rise above their challenges and thrive. Reflecting on kindness. That evening, as Emily tucked Jake and Ella into bed, she sat quietly at the kitchen table, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a simple act of generosity at a cafe to the larger ripple effect it had created, her life was a testament to the power of kindness. She whispered a silent thank you to Keanu, not just for the financial help, but for reminding her that there were good people in the world, people who cared enough to make a difference. Emily resolved to keep paying it forward, just as Keanu had inspired her to do. And as she closed her eyes that night, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. A legacy of kindness. Keanu's Bright Futures Fund continued to grow, helping families across the country and ensuring that no child went hungry at school. For him, it wasn't about the accolades or headlines, it was about knowing that small, quiet acts of kindness could change lives. As he watched the ripple effect spread, Keanu couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. It was a reminder that sometimes, the simplest gestures, paying for a hot chocolate, leaving an envelope, or listening to someone's story, could spark a chain reaction that made the world a little brighter.